Yo, what's up guys and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going in depth on Arms Warrior, giving you everything you need to know to be a good raider and Mythic Plus player in 10.2. We'll split this video up in two parts covering both Raid and Mythic Plus, and I'll make sure to leave timestamps in the comments down below so you can navigate easily to the parts that you are interested in. Before we get started, let's briefly touch on what it is our tier set actually does. For our 2 set, we get 30% increased damage on Rend, and sudden death can be procced by Rend's bleed damage. And for our 4 set, we get 2 effects. Firstly, when claiming a sudden death proc, we will use a thunderclap for 100% increased damage. Secondly, the target will take 50% of the bleed damage from a sudden proc execute over 5 seconds. Now that we've covered what the tier set does, we can have a look at the talents Arms Warriors use in Mythic Plus. We'll be covering 2 builds in this list that are both viable and probably be swapped in between for tyrannical and fortified weeks. For the first build, we'll see a return of the already used Blademasters Torment build. Nothing on this build has changed from the way it has already been played in the previous season and will still do very heavy hitting AoE. The reason this build does so well in Mythic Plus is because of the synergy from Blademasters Torment and Hurricane. It will give you a huge chunk on on-demand burst in big AoE scenarios. However, there is one downside to this build, because the single target output from this build is significantly worse than the ST that the other build does and is also quite far behind Fury. This build, however, excels way more in AoE, making it a very solid choice for fortified weeks. For the next build, we take a look at the Fervor build. This is a build that is very orientated around using as many globals within your sweeping strikes window, building up a very big whirlwind hit. This goes hand in hand with Test of Might, which will increase our strength after Warbreaker ran out for 1% for every 10 rage spent. Besides getting a very big whirlwind hit, we also play this build with Fervor of Battle. This talent will slam our primary target if we hit 2 or more targets with whirlwind. Because we play this talent, we'll be buffing up our slam as much as possible with talents as improved slam and crushing force. Once again, this build is very viable in Mythic Plus and has a bit higher single target output because of opting out of Blademasters and instead playing Warlord's Torment. This build also performs very well on bosses where you are likely to pull trash on bosses, since our whirlwind will hit every mob and slams the priority target in the meanwhile. Now that we've covered the talent build, we can start taking a look into the rotation that we play in Mythic Plus. Let's start off by going over the Blademasters Torment build first. We will start off fighting by charging in, which you will want to immediately follow up with a Thunderclap. Next up, we'll use our avatar as soon as possible, applying deep wounds and bringing us into the Hurricane window. We'll follow that up with a Cleave, and next up we'll use Warbreaker and Thunderous Roar, followed by a Whirlwind. After the Whirlwind, we use one more Cleave and follow it up with our Bladestorm. Last up, we'll follow this up with a Cleave into Sweeping Strikes, followed by another Whirlwind. If Cleave is available again at this point, you'll use Cleave. If it is not, then you will use an Overpower first and then again into a Cleave. After coming out of Burst, our rotation stays fairly similar. We'll want to use Cleave if there's 3 or more targets, Mortal Strike if there's up to 3 targets with Sweeping Strikes, Overpower to fill between Cleaves and or Mortal Strike, Whirlwind to gain stacks of Overpower or to damage in case there's multiple targets, Thunderclap to refresh Rend or proc Overpower, Rend and Slam as last resort to gain a stack of Overpower. Now with our 4 set, we can also use a sudden death proc instead of a Thunderclap, also applying Rend to all the targets near. This build is fairly simple and does very high burst damage on high target count pools. Like I said before, there is a catch though, with the single target damage output being quite significantly lower. The rotation for the Fervor build looks quite a bit different and might be a bit easier than the Blademasters Torment build. In this build we see a lot of different priorities depending on target count to min-max, but for the sake of keeping it simple, I will narrow it down a little bit just to make it easier. We will enter the pack using Avatar and Charge. Assuming that the mobs are already stacked, we will follow up with a Sweeping Strikes into a Warbreaker. After we use Warbreaker, we will use a Thunderous Roar and spam as many Whirlwinds as humanly possible. Between Whirlwinds you use Overpower to build Rage. Whenever you get a sudden death proc, you will prioritize this over Whirlwind in AoE. If you get 2 stacks of Martial Prowess, you will instead use Mortal Strike up to 8 targets. If you do not have overpower stacks, you instead use Thunderclap to gain a charge, but this rarely happens. This rotation pretty much always repeats itself in the exact same form both in and outside of CDs. Try to align your Warbreaker and Sweeping Strikes as much as possible though, because of the Test of Might buff. Whenever there is 3 or less mobs though, the only thing that really changes is that we use Mortal Strike instead of Whirlwind. This build is pretty simple and it revolves a lot around you spamming as many Whirlwinds as possible while targeting the target you want to be targeting, because you will also use a slam on it. Since Blizzard is known to tune and tweak a lot of trinkets in early season, we'll briefly talk about the best simming options currently available. The Cataclysmic Signet brand seems to be simming very high for Mythic Plus scenarios and is currently considered one of the best choices to go for. This trinket will be dropped by Smolderon in the raid, and it might take you a little while to get it. The second trinket on the list is Augury of the Primal Flame. This trinket deals a massive chunk of damage currently, and it will most likely get nerfed because of the excessive amount of damage it actually does. This trinket drops from the final boss Varrock, and it will also most likely be very hard to acquire in the first few weeks. If you cannot get your hands on these trinkets, a good alternative would be to target Pip's Emerald Friendship Badge. This trinket will rotate between secondary stats, boosting it passively, and it seems pretty high for both ST and AoE scenarios. For the tier set slots, we will try and focus on the legs, shoulders, chest and hands, as they are currently giving us the best stats. Of course, this could be different for you based on your current gear and stat weight, so make sure to simulate your character to find out which pieces suit best for you. Since there isn't much available about the legendary yet, we can't really talk about it too much, but we can safely assume that it will be best in slot purely based on its item level alone. Last on the list, we'll talk about Embellishments. And for Mythic Plus, one of the best embellishments will once again be the Frostfire Legs of Preparation. When engaging a pack, this will give you a significant burst of haste, which has a very high uptime due to the chaining and fast pace of Mythic Plus. Furthermore, this gives us a nice initial burst window of haste, working very well with both builds we've gone over so far. Secondly, the Shadow Flame Tempered Armor patch will still remain a very solid choice, upping our single target even more. Despite all the nerfs it has gotten, it is still one of the best options to go for, and especially with our Blademasters Torment build, we can use the single target damage increase. As a good alternative, you can also choose to go for the Allied Wrist Guards of Companionship, because these will give you a big versatility boost, boosting both your damage done and reduce your damage taken. Later into the season, the second embellishment could also default to be Elemental Lariat, but since we don't really have any sockets at the start of the season, this will be a significant decrease. Now that we've covered the Mythic Plus section, we can move on to the talents which we will be using for Raid. Our Raid build has pretty much remained the same for the past seasons and will continue to remain exactly the same to what we are already used to. We will once again be playing the Juggernaut build, which is heavily revolved around Mortal Strikes and Overpowers. This build will however be a bit different to play this season due to the changes that they have made to Ignore Pain not counting towards Anger Management, Tactician and Test of Might. We won't be able to use Ignore Pain anymore as a Rage Dump ability, buffing up our Test of Might, proccing Overpowers or reducing the cooldown of Colossus Smash. This might seem like a minor change, but it actually adds up to be a decent nerf. Since we built a lot of Rage during our burst window and our Overpower now also generating Rage, we are kinda lacking ways to spend it. With that being said, and our talents being covered, we can take a look into how the rotation actually plays out. When you engage the fight, you will start off with Avatar and instantly charge. You will start off with Mortal Strike to apply deep wounds, and after this you will use your Colossus Smash and Thunderous Roar. At this point you should be pretty packed on Rage, which you will want to spend starting with a Thunderclap into a Mortal Strike followed by a Whirlwind. After this, our rotation will become very dependent on procs and rage generation, and you will want to prioritize spending as much rage as possible in the Colossus Smash window. This will be the priority following your burst. You will use Colossus Smash on cooldown, Warbreaker on cooldown, Mortal Strike on cooldown, Execute to consume certain death procs, Overpower whenever you got 2 stacks, Whirlwind to dump rage, Thunderclap to dump rage, and Slam to spend excess rage. Whenever we get into Execute window, the priority will change slightly however. We will use Rend if below 4 seconds left on the debuff, Overpower while below 40 Rage, Mortal Strike with 2 stacks of Executioner's Precision or to refresh deep wounds, Execute as our main spender, and Overpower as a filler. Now that we've covered the rotation, it's time to once again take a look at the trinkets. Like I said in the Mythic Plus section, Blizzard likes to adjust tuning on trinkets, so these might change throughout the season. Firstly, we'll want to use the Cataclysmic Signet brand. This trinket is miles ahead of the rest, and like I said before, this trinket is most likely going to see some tuning changes because of its incredible damage output. One side effect of this trinket, however, is that you will take significant damage as well from using it. So this might be a banned trinket during heavy healing intensive fights. Secondly, we'll see Razan's Gleaming Eye. Just like we mentioned in our Fury Warrior guide, this trinket currently sims second strongest with a passive effect dealing damage and leaving a dot on the target. This trinket is easily farmable since it drops from Mythic Plus, making it a solid second option. A very solid alternative would be Pip's Emerald Friendship Badge. This will passively swap out between secondary stat bonuses being procced from your abilities. For our tier set slots, once again we'll focus on the legs, shoulders, chest and hands, as these currently just give the best stats for us. This could however be different for you based on your current gear and stat weight, so make sure to sim your character to see which upgrades suit you the best. Just like we said in the Mythic Plus section, we do not have any information on the legendary yet, but we can safely assume that it will be best in slot purely for its item level alone. Lastly, we'll have a look into the embellishments for raid. Even though the Shadow Flame tempered armor patches have taken a significant nerf, they are currently still the best option for single target raid scenarios. A good alternative to this for more survivability would be the allied wrist guards of companionship. This embellishment will give you a little less DPS in exchange for some more survivability. And lastly, we still have the undulating Spore Cloak. This embellishment has seen massive nerfs and it's only useful if you want to go full blow defensive, losing a big chunk of damage in the process. Do be aware though that since the Spore Cloak nerfs, in most scenarios you will not want to swap either of the two options out for this. And that is pretty much everything there is to cover about Arms Warrior in both single target and AoE scenarios. I once again want to tell you guys that Blizzard will tune trinkets throughout the season if they think they are under or overpowered, so make sure to keep an eye on the trinkets that I've mentioned. Furthermore, gear suggestions are always relative to your stat weight. The best way to find out what gear fits you the best is to simulate your character yourself. Just because it's biz for me doesn't mean it has to be biz for you. I hope you guys enjoyed this guide and learned a thing or two. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, if you have any comments or questions, make sure to leave them in the comments down below or ask me live on twitch.tv/JuventusTV.